Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome everyone to this FEMYSOnow session of combating racism. I'll be hosting today's session with an exciting speaker here with us today. My name is Mana Ali. I am the interim vice president for the Federation of Student Islamic Societies in the UK. And with me today is Julie Pascoet, who I will ask to introduce herself in a second. So FEMYSOnow is a live stream and podcast series by FEMYSO, and we're live currently on YouTube and Facebook. FEMYSO is the Forum of European Muslim Youth and Student Organizations, and this year, 2021, it marks our 25th anniversary. So today we are going to be discussing combating racism, and during this discussion, Julie will be discussing her journey through activism, highlighting lessons that us as young people can learn who are interested in human rights, and some points that we'll be discussing are initiatives that tackle racism around Europe, action points that can be taken, how to raise awareness, Black Lives Matter, and some other points as well. So enough from me, I will pass over to Julie. Assalamu alaikum, Julie, how are you?
Alaikum salam, Muna. Alaikum salam, everybody. It's really great to be with you tonight. So my name is Julie Pascoet, as Mona mentioned, and I'm a Senior Advocacy Officer at ENAR, the European Network Against Racism, which is a pan-European advocacy organization, advocating for racial equality and justice in Europe. We've been created in 1998, and we are also a network of more than 150 organizations across Europe, including FEMYSO, who is also a member organization of our network. It's nice to be with you.
It's great to have you with us today. So before we get into some of the questions that we have for you, could you talk to us a little bit about your background, so how you got to where you are today, even your studies, if you will?
Yes, of course. So my background is I studied international relations and political studies. And then I started to work in Brussels in European organizations. And I also volunteered at FEMYSO as a younger person. And it was a very, very important experience for me because FEMYSO is really good at empowering young people and helping them to achieve what they want to do in life. And then I started at the European Network Against Racism. I'm also very active at local level, working on especially on issues on feminism and also like continuing on anti-racism. I'm really involved in the Muslim community as well. And at ENAR, I'm really working specifically on advocacy, meaning I'm in regular contact with institutions, policymakers, civil society organizations, different kind of organizations working on equality in order to ensure that they hear the voice of racialized groups in Europe, they hear their concerns, and they try to make a change in policies and legislation so that it's having a positive impact on the lives of racialized people.
That's really great to hear. So could you tell us a little bit about, so what's your vision for ENAR when it comes to fighting racism?
So at ENAR, our vision is really to ensure that equality and justice is a reality for all. There is a full enjoyment of rights, of fundamental rights for all. There is the ability for all in Europe to be who you want to be, without fearing for your life, without fearing to be excluded in different areas of life. And our vision is also solution-oriented, meaning that as an advocacy organization, working with our members, working on the basis of evidence and data collection around racism, we really want to be a driving force to find solutions and to find positive solutions to fight against racism in Europe. That's why we really focus on advocacy, trying to see what can be changed in policies and legislation, trying to see how we can support civil society organizations at the grassroots level who really struggle. And this is really what we are trying to do on a daily basis, specifically in the ENAR Secretariat, because I forgot to mention the Secretariat in Brussels is really the kind of body coordinating the whole network.
Great. So are there specific projects that you're working on as part of your role within ENAR?
So we have different priority areas. I've been working a lot on specific forms of racism, ensuring there is a recognition of specific forms of racism, ensuring that organizations working on these specific forms of racism are being heard, are being recognized. So I worked on anti-Gypsyism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, Afrophobia, etc. I worked a lot on these different issues. I also piloted a specific project some years ago on the intersectional discrimination affecting Muslim women in Europe. So we looked at different countries and how we were trying to see how sexism and racism were actually creating a new reality of discrimination specifically for Muslim women. And this was a very innovative project at the time, looking at the intersections of discrimination. And recently, I've been working a lot around the new EU action plan against racism, trying to ensure it includes main elements to tackle structural racism meaningfully in Europe. Also, we are working a lot on national action plan against racism to help civil society to advocate for solutions against racism in their national and local contexts. And recently, we've launched a report on the impact of counterterrorism policies on racialized groups. So we are working now on disseminating this report and showing how these kind of policies are actually contributing to racialize Muslims in Europe and Muslims, including migrants in Europe. And this is a very important report because the EU has also a strong competence and strong agenda on this issue as well, and is having an impact on national development.
Okay, thank you for going into that. I've seen that you've done some amazing work in your roles, and we'll love to protect you and guide you in doing even more for our community and for the community as a whole in Europe. So, what challenges have you found when articulating or highlighting what racist structures look like within the context of Europe?
So there are different challenges. One of them is how we recognize that the racialization process of some groups. How do we recognize that Europe still has a racism issue, and race is not about biological aspect, but it's about a social construction that is constructing certain groups as an homogeneous group and attributing them negative prejudices, and that this is having an impact on their lives. And in Europe, there is and until 2020, which was a turning point, the taboo was really deep. It's still a taboo, but it was even deeper, especially in continental Europe, if I can say, of looking at race issue as really structural, as really deeply embedded in Europe DNA. In the way Europe has been built, in Europe history, and still having an impact today. And this is best illustrated in the fact that most countries in Europe don't have equality data disaggregated by race, unlike in the UK. So we cannot know exactly what is the situation of racialized groups in some areas of life. We cannot know if there is overrepresentation, underrepresentation, we cannot inform policies in the best way because we don't have a full picture what are the problems, even though we are able to collect data in alternative ways, but it's not the same. It's also best exemplified by all the difficulty to decolonize Europe history, to decolonize many monuments, many museums, etc. So this is new. Like, I mean, the decolonization movement is not new, but it has taken a new, really a new importance, which was not there before. And even I also take the example because we also work with companies in Europe, and we had a lot of trouble to work with companies and to really have them talk about racial diversity in their workforce, and to really do specific measures to ensure that racialized groups are included in their workforce, and to assess also to what extent they are included or not. And now we see it's now changing, but these were some illustrations of this problem. For example, we were part of a Brussels So White campaign. The campaign 2 years ago, I think, on highlighting how white the EU institutions are. And this was very difficult to discuss with the EU institution on that. Why the EU institution didn't have any specific measures in their diversity strategies for racialized groups when they were so white. And this was something, this is now changing, but this is really showing to what extent it has been very difficult to move away from individual acts of racism, and to really have institutions, have different structures in society addressing structural racism, like overrepresentation or underrepresentation of racialized groups in certain areas of life.
Okay. And so then, where have you seen policy changes that you think have been successful, even if it's just a little bit, to challenge racial inequality and make a material difference for like the Black communities?
So there is a new EU anti-racism agenda following the massive anti-racism protests, the Black Lives Matter movement, the impact of COVID-19 on racialized groups, shining a light on structural inequalities. And following the massive mobilization, the institution had to act, and at European level, they published the EU Action Plan Against Racism in September 2020. And it included some of our demands, some demands that ENAR had been advocated for a long time, including specific measures on racial diversity in institutions, such as specific traineeship schemes for racialized groups, staff survey, including some data on racialized groups. So this kind of thing were really new. There were also specific acknowledgement of the structural aspect of racism, and when it comes to terminology and language, this was really very positive and a change, because as I was mentioning, there was really a taboo about the structural aspect of racism. So in the action plan, you have this definition, even though in the measures it's still lacking really like structural measures, but at least there is this understanding that racism is structural and can even be perpetrated by institutions. So this is really a first point. Another very important point is the framework for National Action Plan Against Racism that this strategy is giving. So for the first time, there is a demand from the EU institutions for countries to have a National Action Plan Against Racism, even though it's not mandatory, but there is this strong push and this to have member states acting at national level. And also there is an acknowledgement of racism in the police, even though it's still weak. But there is some ideas to have a specific legislation on racism in law enforcement. So this is not fully implemented yet. There are still a lot of challenges, including when it comes to civil society participation, including when it comes to racialized groups being included in the policy design. But still, we see that terminology, language has changed. We see that there is some measures that are new, that we are moving forward to some extent. And this is quite positive. And not to mention, of course, all the decolonization movements and actions that have been happening in Europe these last months, including cities taking very specific decolonizing approach, including like big NGOs also questioning themselves about their responsibility in colonialism, etc. So we have also seen there is at least a brand new awareness and willingness to change, which is quite unprecedented, I would say.
Yeah, speaking of, unprecedented, well, not really unprecedented, but you spoke a bit about the Black Lives Matter movement, and specifically, what in light of the BLM movement, what are some of the main, what are some of the main similarities or differences in how it manifests itself, how racism manifests itself in Europe and even and the United States, in terms of like the difference and similarities?
So I'm not an expert on the US context, but what I could say is still, I think we need to be really cautious. Of course, there is a system, a global system of oppression when it comes to racism and to race, and it has been based on the historical context. It has been perpetrated in different countries. There are a lot of differences because the population is different, because the states have been built differently. What is very different, not different, but what is very key for Europe is to understand how the deep responsibility it's having in the world, even on the US, when it comes to the racist oppression that has been spread across centuries. And I think this deep historical responsibility of Europe needs to be addressed, and it's high time it's being addressed. And this is quite, actually, this is and this is always so surprising, if I can say, and so amazing, if I could say, ironically, that this had not been done, and that even countries have been more advanced, when we know how a lot of things started from Europe. And even like hearing some people in power denying that there is any impact to nowadays from what happened in centuries. I think this is really the biggest difference. I think is the level of the taboo in Europe, and the amount of work that still needs to be done. Yeah, so I think that's. But when it comes to then police brutality, when it comes to structural inequalities in healthcare, I think there are a lot of similarities. Of course, as I said, the composition of the population is not always the same. There are a lot of similarities, and we really need to tackle the structural inequalities in this.
Of course. So in the current context that we're in, and I do mean with COVID-19, and how have you seen COVID-19 play a role in identifying the needs of those from marginalized community and even the Black community as well? How have you seen it play out in that way?
I mean, for all inequalities, COVID-19 crisis has been really like exacerbating the level of inequalities. I mean, the fact that, for example, the inequalities of accessing healthcare or being cured or being taken care of in healthcare system in the right way without any racial prejudice had an impact on the lives of racialized group. And I think there has been even like some studies showing that Black people were more inclined to die during COVID-19 crisis because of racism. And this has been shown even more also when it comes to and I think what has been also very interesting is to see how COVID-19 crisis has shown the intersections of inequalities when it comes to race and to class. For example, in overcrowded neighborhoods where many in some of them where many racialized groups live because of the lack of opportunities to get jobs or to be included in some society and in some areas of life, showing how difficult it was for them to leave the lockdown and how they were also over policed in this neighborhood, really showed how inequalities intersect, but also who are the privileged in society in Europe. And that's also a turning point, I would say, in the awareness of what is the concrete impact of racism in people's lives.
Sorry, I think my computer's lagged a little bit. So on to my next point. So you've talked a little bit earlier about the far right. So I guess, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing the Black and ethnic communities who want to organize on the issue of racism, and especially considering the far right, and even when figures within the government have expressed such bigoted views and have had basically no backlash onto them?
So I think we talk about the far right, but at the same time, I think the far right is less and less the problem. What I mean by that is that we see that the far right ideas are really mainstream now in the mainstream political parties. And this is true in France, this is true also in Austria, in Denmark. You see that there are really problematic narratives and problematic legislation or policies being supported by mainstream political parties. So this is really a reality that we also need to tackle. And sometimes focusing only on far right is not the best, because then we also miss the point of people in power and not from these parties. I think one of the biggest challenge as well is, and that's what we see in our network, is the attacks on fundamental rights of civil society organization, of racialized people, Black people trying to organize themselves around their cause. We have seen recently the deregistration, the dissolution of the Collective Against Islamophobia in France. This is unprecedented in ENAR's history, even for recent European history. This is really unprecedented to have such a civil society organization being dissolved this way. And also recently, again, a French organization trying to get EU funding, and when they got the EU funding, the French minister tried to interfere towards the European Commission to stop this funding. And this was also on the media. So we really see concrete attacks on fundamental rights, on civic space, and not only when it comes to racism, but also equality or social issues. And this is really concerning. And I think what's very specific also for the anti-racist movement is, and racialized group specifically, is that actually dehumanization of these groups, which is the result of racism, is helping different political forces to deny power and rights so easily. Because in the case of Muslims, for example, it's so easy to say that these groups doesn't deserve the same rights because they are Muslims, so they are potentially suspects, so they need to be controlled. So there is also specific aspect in this violation of fundamental rights when it comes to racialized people, and specifically Muslims and Black and migrant people, Roma people, etc., because of this dehumanization.
No, it's really heartbreaking to see, especially I mean in the context of the UK, especially in the higher education sphere. We saw a lot of movements in student unions in our universities who would send out statements and ensuring that the university recognizes the participation and the inclusion of Black students and those from minority communities within the university. But I guess it's very different in like the contexts of the different European countries.
But if I can add also on this, on the lack also of condemnation when governments are indulging in racist speech. This is also something we see as ENAR can be the EU's role to also condemn and to go against this political narrative that is so damaging. And for the moment, we see really a lack of political courage to go against these narratives and these views.
And I think also like a fair for at least within the student communities and across Europe, in how to articulate their views and how to best speak to those who are in leadership positions or in higher positions within higher education spheres, or even in workplaces, in understanding those rights. Although it seems very like basic to us for us to have the same standard of like acceptance, if you will, and enable to have equal rights with our white counterparts. But as you mentioned, it takes a while. It takes a while to be able to do that. How can we? So then you mentioned earlier a bit about structural racism. So how can we tackle misconceptions about racism, right? In being limited to just the interpersonal. So namely, how can we explicitly show that it's a structural issue and break down some of the language like structural racism so that we're ensuring a shared understanding about what we use in these terms?
Yeah, I think there is a challenge. The challenge is about, as I mentioned earlier, the data. And the fact that we don't have a systematic equality data, at least in most EU countries. Beyond that, there is it's important to, as we highlight in our report on intersectional discrimination, it's important to show how first to have this go back to history and the historical oppressions of some groups in Europe that have been very deep, with very racist laws against specific groups, with even genocides, etc. So this is really like first going back to the historical responsibility of Europe, and then showing that this history has not been first tackled properly and still is having an impact on widespread prejudices, and then having an impact on exclusion, and not ad hoc, like some occurrences, but really like persistent and structural exclusion. And we can, and it's not always easy to show when you don't have the data, but at the same time, there are a lot of studies that are using proxies to show that. I mean, for also for the European Parliament, for example, we have also issued a specific paper on showing how the Parliament was so wide. So you can see that there is a problem there. So structurally. And you look at all the institutions, so you can see there is a problem there structurally while using proxies to show that. I think you can also see some laws and policies that are still in place and that are not explicitly, because it's more difficult nowadays to be explicit, but that are through political discourse, through implementation, targeting only specific groups. For example, headscarf bans in Europe. You have a very interesting OSF report on that shows how the number of laws and policies against religious signs, but actually we know in practice that it's about headscarf bans thanks to the analysis of political discourses and how it's being implemented in courts. You also have the counterterrorism policies, which are neutral in language most of the time. But we know how they have been framed after some political debates, parliamentary debates, how they are being implemented in practice, disproportionately affecting some Muslims. There is also racial profiling. Racial profiling is a very also tangible issue of structural racism. It has been shown, even in countries where it's difficult to collect data like France, it has been shown how Black and brown people are disproportionately arrested, stopped and searched by the police. So all this is really helping to move beyond this individual approach. Also, the migration policies are really also so blatantly structurally racist. So all this is showing us and how structural racism is in Europe, all these different dimensions. And we also need to understand that why governments are so keen on addressing individual acts of racism is because it's more convenient for them. Why? It's because it's not putting them into question. And that's the paradox in which we are at the moment, is that we advocate for institutions to tackle structural racism, institutional racism, but at the same time, we need to be aware that these same institutions are the ones perpetrating racism. So this is also a reality, a perspective we need to take into account. So while we have advanced on the understanding of racism, there has never been so much backlash against civil society. Why? Because there is this acknowledgement that racism is not just coming from individuals, it's also coming from institutions.
So then it comes the question, but what can we do to ensure that we can fight this, to fight these institutions who are perpetuating this?
So I think first I would say something basic, but I think there is a lot to do with learning from past struggles, from past movements, from history of oppression in Europe. This is needed in order to really inform our activism, better understand the intersections also across groups, not to replicate the same mistakes, but build on them, build and advance, move forward. I think there is a lot to learn from the people who have fought against these inequalities before us, and this is really key. Then I would say like building our communities that are affected by specific forms of manifestations of racism. I think FEMYSO is, for example, a great platform to do that. So really building the strength, the power of marginalized communities is really key. And then I would say coalition building is really important, but as long as it starts from the people and as it centers the marginalized people, marginalized voice. And that's also based on my experience. It is very important to pay attention to when you build coalition, is that it needs to be a safer spaces for marginalized voices. It needs to be a space where you can build connection, when you can empower your cause without having to too much to convince or to justify yourself. And that's very important. I think coalition building is key, because I think there is also a danger of advancing on a siloed approach. What I mean by that is, for example, I've worked a lot on specific forms of racism, and sometimes what we have done is that we have worked only among ourselves, only or with organizations working on, for example, Islamophobia, and not building enough coalition building at the next stage, because there was this need to strengthen each other. There was this need that we need to be heard, because it's true that in many social justice movements, we were not heard. So we really needed to strengthen for our voices. But then there is another steps to build strong coalitions while still centering our voices, while ensuring our voices are at the center. But we cannot move forward alone. Even though we are at the forefront, we cannot move forward alone, especially when it comes to Islamophobia, I would say. Because Islamophobia in Europe is really the entry door to deny rights of all people, basically. When you see how it's so easy, as I mentioned earlier, it's so easy to deny rights when you are being framed Muslims or Islamists, etc. So this is key, that we build strong coalitions. And I think this is what we are learning as well. For example, on the issue of CCIF, we were also, we approached many different NGOs. And I know in Austria also, on the new counterterrorism policies, they are building strong coalitions. And this is really crucial also, because if we want, and if we understand structural racism as it is, we understand that structural racism cannot be disconnected from other forms of oppressions, from patriarchy, from capitalism, etc. So it's absolutely necessary to build coalition with other social movement groups if you really want to tackle the structural inequalities. It's not just about Muslims only, it's about many different aspects of life, of oppressions.
I think you mentioned that at the beginning, and that one of your projects was intersectional aspects of racism. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. We worked a lot on intersectionality. Yeah.
Could you talk a bit?
Muslim women. Yeah.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So this project was really an innovative project in the way it looked at the intersections of how Muslim women, especially visibly Muslim women wearing religious signs, are not only impacted because they are women, they are Muslim, but also because they are women. There is really this gender approach on this issue, and we really wanted to see also to show that is not just a religious issue, or is not just because we wear religious sign, but it's also because we are women that we are targeted. And with this project, it also helped our movement to understand better gradually what is intersectionality and what it is to be affected by racism. It's not only you are not a single identity. You are not a single you are not affected by things in your life just because you are one identity. There are many identities that can lead you to live some very specific inequalities and exclusion. And that's also what we wanted to show also with this project, because we were also seeing that some feminist movements were against our rights, were actually trying to deny us rights, Well, actually, it was the arguments and the discourses around Muslim movement were also deeply sexist. So it was also a way to show to some feminist movement, but look, this is also your fight. You should also look at it this way. And again, I think we cannot fight against discrimination of Muslim women without fighting against patriarchy, without fighting against racism. So all this is really connected. And after that, we built a partnership with the Center for Intersectional Justice. I mentioned a report we released last year, looking at intersectional discrimination. It's on a website. It's very good also because it has very clear definition on different forms of racism and discrimination, and how all this is interconnected, and how the EU at the moment, and this is changing, we hope, but the EU at the moment is really like focusing on individual kind of discrimination and overlooking the structural aspect and all the impact it's having. For the moment, the EU legislation is very focusing on individual discrimination. That's also why we have very bad case law on discrimination against Muslim women, because it's not taking into account the overall, the structural aspect of discrimination of Muslim women, meaning the level of exclusion that Muslim women actually encounter. It's not taking into account that. So this is really something we also need to change.
So first of all, before I go into my next question, I want to encourage the audience at this point. If you have any questions, please pop it into the chat, and inshallah, I'll take a look at it after I've asked my next question. We're very honored to have Julie with us today, and I personally have learned a lot from her from just the session. So please do ask your questions. So I guess I've kind of come to the last of my question, and this one is speaking directly to the member organizations of FEMYSO, because FEMYSO represents member organizations all across Europe, representing the Muslim youth across Europe through many different initiatives. But especially in the work that I've done, and the work that the campaigns team of FEMYSO has done, is that we want our member organizations, our Muslim youth, to be more active when it comes to this area of racism. In your opinion, and in your experience, what advice can you give to these organizations, especially those who come from like the country context that are very difficult in being able to speak out against racism, and even countries where people are saying racism isn't as bad as it was 50 years ago, it's not that bad, X, Y, and Z, especially in that kind of context that exists? What advice can you give to Muslim youth and Muslim organizations who live in these kind of contexts to be able to tackle racism?
So first, join the FEMYSO or join ENAR. No, but it's really important to be in these kind of networks, because it's a lot of resources you can get to build your capacity and to build your resilience as organization. I think it's it's very important to ensure you are safe. So because of the difficulty we are saying, and we really see an increase in the level of attacks against organizations, I think we really need to ensure safety measures, that you also plan safety measures. You protect yourself and your organization with, I mean, digitally, physically, etc. And I think I lost my words. Sorry. So I think this is really key. Also, yes, when it comes to rights, I think it's very important to also have addresses or have legal support to reach to who you can reach to, especially when it comes to Muslims, youth and Muslims organization in general. as I mentioned, there is a lot of infringement of rights, and it's very important that you have this also at hand, so that you can protect yourself again legally and quickly, I would say. And then I think in order also to care about your communities, etc., it's very important. Of course, we need to collect data about the reality of what we are living. We need to ensure we show that, and we make it visible to ask our decision makers to act. But there is also, especially we see that the level of mental health in racialized groups, it's very important that you also have positive activities that is empowering, that is valuing all the very positive things that are happening in your groups, and all the good actions that you can make. Because I mean, I'm talking for ENAR and organization member of ENAR. Sometimes we focus a lot on we every day when we see racism in practice, and it can be very overwhelming. And sometimes it's good maybe to plan actions that are more empowering and more positive. And I'm sure FEMYSO is already doing that, and a lot of you are doing that as well. And then, as I said, I mean, it's very important to build international support and network, as we have seen on many different cases, especially in France. France is the most blatant example, so I'm sorry to always come back to that, but it's the international support, the international connection that some organizations were having really helped them also to build their case, and to also show to the outside world the state of France at the moment. And believe me, there is really like people even in the institutions or in international organizations that are really like aware now of what's happening in France and other countries, thanks to these international connections and international support. So also build these networks as well.
In terms of, obviously, it's incredibly important to build allies and people to advocate, to help advocate alongside you. Since you were part of FEMYSO, I hope you don't mind me asking this question. How did you see FEMYSO as playing a role back when you were as part of the organization in supporting Muslim youth in speaking out against injustices?
I think FEMYSO has been, I mean, is really like putting its resources to empower young people. I mean, really building their skills and empowering them. So not to complain against racism and but really like to be also change makers. For example, by organizing, by organizing seminars and having us facilitating. I mean, these are really like basic things, but really like putting us in roles that are really active and positive roles, and being there to lead towards change. I think this is really what FEMYSO brought to me, like just putting trust in me to do stuff, and learning together. Also spiritually, I think it has been an amazing adventure to work with FEMYSO, because of all these spiritual aspects in all its actions, and this cannot be underestimated, of course.
How about in your work in ENAR? So you mentioned that ENAR is a great platform to be able to further the voice, if you will, when campaigning against racism. How can the Muslim youth utilize ENAR or work with ENAR in its objectives?
Yes, I think there are different things. First, I would say learn about all the policy and legislative developments in Europe, and potentially like advocate yourself when it comes to different agendas. or build alliances to advocate on some agendas. I mean, for example, there is some work around Islamophobia, around, as I was mentioning, counterterrorism policies, or around National Action Plan against racism. So we have created working group at the Secretariat where we gather members to work on specific policy areas, and we ensure that, and we help our members to advocate on these different issues, or like ensure there is a peer exchange through across the network on these issues, and this is really important. There is also some funding available. It's not big, but we have national projects every year, and you can apply for small projects. There is also, I mean, just the connections with anti-racist movement in Europe. So this ability to contact, to have an access to in big database of anti-racist movement organizations, but also policymakers in different parts of Europe, including in EU institutions. So there is also this facilitation of contacts and support. I mean, we know that some of our organizations are really attacked and sometimes defamated, demonized by institutions themselves or by media. And we try our best to also step in and support them as much as we can with the connections and influence the Secretariat have. But this is really a service that we give to our members as well.
Thank you so much. I think that brings us like just about to the end of this amazing session about combating racism. Before we end this session today, any final words from you, Julie?
I just want to say that I'm always so pleased to meet you and to be with you. I'm amazed by what you have managed to do on a voluntary basis with no staff. You are just, I admire you so much. Mashallah, you are really an inspiration for me. And please keep up the good work, because your role is so important. Thank you so much.
I couldn't agree more. I think everyone who's watching this, everyone who's part of a member organization or even part of FEMYSO themselves, you all have so much power to be able to make changes. And it starts from, I think Julie would agree, it all starts from just one person to have an idea, to have a motivation to do something, and then it kind of grows into a whole organization, if you will, working with different people, and you know, even speaking to people about how the impacts racism has on the Black community, and so on and so forth. So yeah, keep doing what you guys are doing. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the session. It has been absolutely amazing to speak to Julie on all of the work that she's doing from her background and advice that she has for all of us. For all of you guys watching, if you guys have any questions, obviously feel free to contact us at FEMYSO, and inshallah we will see you at the next live stream that we have in the future. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you everyone. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik.
Assalamu alaikum.